And now we welcome our next speaker, who is going to set up his computer. We're very glad to say welcome to Dave Patten, who is head of new media at the Science Museum in London. Here he's managing all aspects of new media and AV. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation. We're going to look at some key innovative digital projects from the museum, but also something that sounds really exciting, the new project, Robot Detectives. So Dave Patten is going to talk about innovation and experimentation. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Good morning. So my name is Dave Patten, and I'm a technologist, quite geeky. I've been at the Science Museum for a long time, but primarily I'm a storyteller. I use digital media to tell stories for our audiences. I really have been at the Science Museum for a long time. This is a picture of me in the mid-1980s and one of the first exhibitions I worked at the museum. And I'm pretty geeky, so for quite a long time I used to take pictures of technology that I carried with me every day, in the hope that I'd carry less and less over time. And actually, my bag is still full of all of this stuff, maybe slightly less. I don't carry little bags of electronics around now when I fly, because that got pretty difficult coming through customs. And just another picture. So I'm from the Science Museum in London, and for those of you that don't know the Science Museum, we're a large museum in the centre of London. We're a collections-based museum, and I'm just going to start a timer so that I know how I'm doing for time. Oops. Okay. We get 3.4 million people a year through the door. And we're also part of a group of museums. So we're part of a group called the Science Museum Group, which also includes the National Railway Museum in York, the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford, the Museum of Science in Manchester, which is the home of the first passenger railway station in the world, and also a fairly significant historical site in the UK. Locomotion in Shildon, which is where we store lots of the trains that aren't on display in York, and also is an historically significant site. It's the home of Timothy Hackworth, who was one of the founding fathers of the railway. And we own an airfield in the west of England. So this is one of the hangars. This is where we store the 93% of our collection that's not on display to the public. And we're in the middle of a massive project to build new storage facilities on this airfield and move the entire stored collection down to Swindon, which happens over the next couple of years. And as part of that, we're doing a big digitisation project. So as I said, the museum is old. The Science Museum grew out of the Great Exhibition of 1851. And this is the Science Museum collection when it was across the road at the Victoria and Albert Museum, when the collection was known as the Non-Arts Collection. And we've spent the last 20 years building primarily exhibitions and short-term displays. Lots of those are around contemporary science. This is a photograph of an exhibition called Atmosphere, which is about climate change. And we've been able to put lots of technology into those exhibitions to help tell stories to our visitors. But as I said, we're primarily a collections-based museum. So we've started to go back and redevelop our permanent collection galleries. And these are galleries that have an intended lifespan of between 20 and 30 years. So as you can imagine, the way we need to use technology in those exhibitions is quite different from the exhibitions that may last between 2 and 5 years. Technology doesn't last for 20 or 30 years, so you need to be mindful of how you're going to upgrade and update that over time. The museum has a long history of innovation, some forced on us. This is a film from 1927, which shows some of the challenges of opening up a public building to large numbers of people. So how do you make exhibits that are robust for people to use over long periods of time? We were one of the first museums to open a dedicated children's gallery. This picture is from the 1950s, but our children's gallery actually opened in 1931. And this is an interesting piece of film of an innovation that happened in 1960. We introduced a radio audio guide to the museum, and I think we were the first museum in the world to do that. So it was for an exhibition on iron and steel. There were radio transmitters in the museum. You picked up a wand when you came in, and you got to listen to an audio tour while you walked around the museum. It's a wonderful piece of archive film of the museum. But what I really want to talk to you about today is some of the innovation in the digital practice that I've been involved in the last 30 years. And the first thing that I want to talk to you about is an exhibit called The Network. This was an exhibit that was developed in 1994 and 1995, and it was an exhibit designed to give young children, 7 to 14-year-olds, an experience of emerging technology. And what we wanted them to do was expose them to video conferencing. And this was at a time when video conferencing wasn't common at all for anybody. The software didn't really exist. And we built a system that had 6 terminals in the museum and 1 remote terminal in a museum 200 miles away, where children collaborated on a puzzle game about a collection, and the collaboration took place by video conferencing. And we built a video conferencing system from scratch to allow this to happen. Ultimately, this project was not terribly successful, primarily because we had no way of evaluating the whole project while we were doing it. So we evaluated the components, and we found when we put all of those components together, people didn't do what we expected them to do. So they either played the puzzle game, or more commonly, they video conferenced with other people in the museum, which meant that they were using this as a kind of dating service in the museum. But what it did do, it allowed us to learn lots and lots about how you develop and manage really, really complex digital projects for the museum. The next project I want to touch on comes a few years after this. This is a project called SAVE that we developed as part of the Welcome Wing, which is a large new building which opened in the Science Museum in 2000, devoted to contemporary science. And we wanted to give visitors an opportunity to take something away from that experience. And we looked at all sorts of things while we were doing the development in the late 90s. We looked at having printers where you could print things out that you'd collected as you went around the exhibition. And in the end, we decided that we'd take a punt on this thing called the World Wide Web. And we developed a system that would generate personal websites for every visitor that came into the Welcome Wing. That was a collection of all of the things they'd done in the Welcome Wing, all of the digital exhibits, basically uploaded assets onto your personal web page, and you could get to see those at home. We at that time were a free museum. We weren't ticketed, so we didn't have a ticket that people could use to log on. One of the exhibitions in the Welcome Wing was on biomedicine, genetics and identity, and in the end we decided to use fingerprint recognition as a way of basically allowing you to save information onto your personal website. And again, this is when fingerprint recognition was quite new. We worked with a company in California called Identicator, who at the time had the most promising fingerprint recognition software around. And they told us when we started working with them it was very, very reliable. It worked with 99.97% of all people. The first thing we did when we tried this out was myself and the head of education at the time took a fingerprint recognition system into a primary school a couple of miles away from the museum over 2 days. And on the first day, we registered every child in the primary school. And then we went back the next day to see how many children we could actually recognize. And we found that we could recognize about 45% of the children. And we got back on the phone to the people in California and said, well, this doesn't work. And they said, we've never tried this with people under 18. We use this primarily for security. So we did a lot of work to basically hone the software to make it really, really easy to register yourself on the system, and developing basically the scanner and the way that you put your hand on the scanner to make sure that you reliably put your hand on the right place on the scanner to get good recognition. We connected this to a variety of exhibits in the museum. This is an exhibit called Sonic Manipulator, which lets you record your voice. And then by manipulating these plastic shapes on this pedestal in front of you, you can distort and change that sound and store that changed sound on your website. And you can see the fingerprint recognition system just up here. We tested with over 5,000 people while we were doing development of this, primarily to get the fingerprint recognition system to work reliably. over the course of that project, and we ran it for just under 5 years, we generated 750,000 unique websites for people, which was quite a lot. We were disappointed. About 15% of people came back and looked at the websites that they'd made. We thought this was quite low, but it turns out when other people started to do this work, 15% was quite a high percentage of people that were prepared to come back and look at it. And one of the challenges was you had to remember some information when you went away from the museum, not least of which was where you went on the web to find the website. And this was this opened in 2000, and this is a time when web access in the UK was not common. Most people accessed the web either at school or through a library, and most people didn't have access at home. So actually, 15%, as it turns out, was quite a good number. The next project I want to talk about is a project called WebLab. This is something that we developed in 2013 and was actually a project that Google came to the museum with. And they came with a proposal to develop an exhibition which showed off the modern web. And they asked us to partner with them to develop an exhibition and to host the exhibition in the Science Museum. WebLab is a collection of physical interactives, or was a collection, it ran for about 14 months in the museum, of physical interactives that you could come to the museum and use. So there was an orchestra, it was a collection of 8 instruments, there were some robots that captured your face and drew your face. There was an exhibit that let you look at where traffic moved around, so when you click a search term on the web, which servers around the world does that term hop through before you get a result? The unique thing about this experience was not only could you come to the museum and do this, you could, through your web browser, interact with the physical things in the museum from anywhere in the world. So this exhibition was open to anybody from anywhere in the world for 24 hours a day. So when the museum closed, this exhibition carried on running. And it was kind of really interesting that first night after the press launch where we moved the people out of the museum, and suddenly this switched to being a purely online experience, and all of these instruments were playing, the robots were all sketching, and they were doing that with people from Hungary, from Brazil, from Russia, from India. It was a pretty astonishing experience, and it's just a quick video to give you a sense of what that was like. That gives you a small sense of what WebLab was like. It was one of the aims of the exhibition was really to inspire young people to take science and technology classes at school, which is a big problem in the UK. We don't train enough scientists, we don't train enough technologists. And probably one of the most gratifying things that came out of WebLab was this project. This is a project by a primary school in North London, Anson Primary School, who a group of young children who are probably 9 or 10 came to visit WebLab and were so inspired they decided they'd go back to their school and build their own version of WebLab. So over a term, over about 3 or 4 months, with the help of a very inspiring ICT teacher, they built a version of WebLab in their school, and they opened it up for a week to all of the parents. They invited the museum to go along and see it, and they invited Google to go along and see it. And they published, or the teacher published, an iBook, which is still available online, telling you how they went about doing this. It was really, really interesting. And I got to do some cool stuff as well. So I got to meet some super cool people when we were doing WebLab. I spent a very enjoyable morning with will.i.am, showing him round and basically playing with lots of children in the space. The next thing I want to talk about very quickly is a thing called World in a Box. So we've, over quite a long time, over 30 years, have been developing digital labels as a way of storytelling around objects that allow us to do more than a physical label allows us to do. Partly because our collection is can be quite opaque. So this is a piece of cable. It's actually quite a significant piece of cable. This is a piece of transatlantic telecommunication cable, but you wouldn't know that to look at it in the museum. It's just a piece of cut cable that's been stripped back. And really, to bring this to life for visitors, we need to tell you why it was significant, perhaps how it was made, how it works, where it was, and who it was used by. And we've done that by putting screens and animations next to objects. And that works sometimes, but we started work in 2012-13 on a system called World in a Box, where we worked with some very early transparent touch screens to build showcases where the front of the showcase is actually a touch screen. And we can start to tell those stories across the object. So the object is always in your field of vision. These have proved to be really, really successful ways of interacting with objects. And it doesn't remove the interpretation from the object. The object and the interpretation work absolutely seamlessly together. It's actually quite hard to film, so there's a real telephone in that case. And we use the transparent screen to tell stories around about that telephone, but also to show you how that telephone works. Moving on, we've always done lots of this experimental work, and in 2016 we rewrote the museum's digital strategy, and as part of that we included an initiative called Digital Lab. And the Digital Lab initiative allows us to explore how museums can fulfill their mission in a digital age, and we do that by running small experiments with visitors, building and testing prototypes, looking for the things that we want to embed in permanent galleries and exhibitions. So Digital Lab initiatives are designed to explore and test emergent technologies, to be rapid and quick. They're not necessarily designed to end up with finished product. They allow us to test new things with visitors. They deliberately have a short lifetime. They're done often at very low cost because we want to establish whether it's worth investing in things for more permanent exhibitions. And we have a large number of interests which we're building small experiments to explore areas of interest within Digital Lab. So we're interested in digital storytelling, augmented and virtual reality, and gaming, and I'll just quickly show you some of those things. So we've run a series of hackathons where we've invited people into the museum to play with our data, to play with our objects, and to play with technology. So this is from one of the first hackathons we ran with Digital Lab. We had about 70 participants come in for 2 days to play with the new Collections API and imagine the kinds of things that they might build. And it helped us test whether the API worked, but also gave us some great ideas for the future. So teams came up with really interesting new types of games that explored the collection. A couple of teams built chatbots, which allowed you to use voice to interrogate the collection. And there was a really interesting project called The Egg, which is a device that you collected when you came to the museum, and you walked around the museum, and it tracked where you were in the museum, looked at how long you spent looking at each object, and then could tell you at the end of your visit the things that it thought you were most interested in, depending on your dwell time in front of objects, but then bring things from our reserve collection that are not on display that you might also be interested in, that you wouldn't have got the opportunity to see. And it was interesting because it actually didn't affect the way you visited a museum. It was a very passive experience. The outputs in Digital Lab, we blog everything. Wherever possible, we share the code for the things that we're doing on GitHub, and we encourage, when we're doing hackathons, for people to do the same. We also did a piece of work looking at digitization. We have a very large collection. We have some of that digitized, but primarily 2D digitization, and we were interested in exploring what the impact of other forms of digitization might be on our workflow and what that meant for storage and access for the public once we'd done that. So we looked at things like this is an astrolabe, and our traditional way of digitizing that would be to take that photograph and put that online, and maybe take ultra-high definition pictures. We looked at what happens when you take that object to pieces and photograph all of the components of that. So you can start to explode that out to let visitors reassemble, to look at things that they wouldn't normally see because they're hidden behind other things. We also did quite a lot of experimentation around rotational photography and photogrammetry so that we could start to build 3D models of things. We did some work using LiDAR scanning. So this is a LiDAR scan of a whole gallery that took about a week to do. So this is a whole gallery that was taken out in 2013. And we're currently working with Sketchfab, looking at how we might get this data onto Sketchfab. At the moment, the data set is absolutely enormous and is quite hard even to host on a computer like this. So we have video renders of it. Sketchfab have some new interesting streaming technology that may allow us to stream this model out of Sketchfab. And more recently, we've been LiDAR scanning single objects. So this is Stephenson's rocket, one of the most iconic objects in the museum's collection. And we LiDAR scanned and photogrammetred this over one night. It took 11 hours to do the capture and 6 weeks to process the data for this model. And we've started to play with this. So this is the model in augmented reality sitting on my coffee table at home. And I'll talk a little bit later about the work we're doing with Magic Leap. And we've just got this model inside Magic Leap. Storytelling. So in 2016, we opened a new mathematics gallery, a permanent mathematics gallery. And at the heart of that gallery, there is an aircraft, a handy page Gugnunk, which was designed in the 1920s with some quite unique features that allowed it to take off and land at much lower speeds than were normal at the time. And it influenced the design of the whole of the exhibition. The exhibition is designed as though that aircraft had been put in a wind tunnel, and everything is laid out along those airflow lines around the aircraft. So you can see all the showcases follow those lines, and those U-shapes represent the turbulence of airflow around the aircraft. As part of that, we LiDAR scanned the aircraft so that we had a good model for the architectural practice to work with. And we built a VR experience to test whether we could storytell effectively in virtual reality. And if we did that, would that make people more or less likely to look at the object in the museum? And this was designed as a VR experience that you did in the museum, sitting in the gallery. And these are just some films of some of the pieces of VR. And it shows you basically the airflow, it shows you the unique features of the aircraft, and also shows you how the airflow around the aircraft have influenced the design of the whole exhibition. So you can see this is towards the end of the sequence. This is the airflow. The aircraft comes into land, and the whole of the gallery grows up around the aircraft. And then you're left back in the gallery as you take your headset off, looking at the aircraft. And this proved to be very, very successful. Almost everybody that did the experience then went back and looked more closely at the object, looked for those features that had been explained in the VR experience. It's certainly something we'd like to do more of, but at the moment the challenge is you need to staff those VR experiences, and that's expensive to do. This led directly to a commercial opportunity. At about just after we did that, we acquired this, which is TMA-19. This is Tim Peake's space capsule, Soyuz capsule, which he came back from the International Space Station on a couple of years ago. And here's Tim unveiling TMA-19 in the Science Museum. And we thought this would be a great opportunity to build a VR experience that took our visitors on that amazing journey that only about 500 people have ever made from the International Space Station back to Earth in the company of Tim Peake. So we built, with a commercial partner, a 12.5-minute long virtual reality experience that was computer modeled, because when we were doing this, the space capsule was still in Russia, being decontaminated and having the last of its military secrets removed before it shipped over to the UK. We did some mocap to make sure that the experience was really realistic. So this is a simulation of the parachute deployment of the capsule. And then I think I have a piece of film. So this is just a short sting of the experience in action.
3, 2, 1. Starting deorbit burn. There's no room for error.
And just gives you a small sense of what that's like. That was a fairly complex project to execute. It took over 100 computers over a month to render that experience out, and about half the cost of developing that experience was in the render time on the render farm to do that. The last project I want to touch on is a new project that we're at the very early stages of working on. It's a project called Dinosaur and Robot Detectives. And this was, it's a project in response to a UK government call last year from Innovate UK to build new kinds of immersive experiences. And they put a call out for 4 types of experience. There was a cultural experience, a broadcast media experience, an e-sport experience, and a performing arts experience. And each of these had a £4 million pot of government money attached to it, and people were asked to bid for this money and bring some match funding. And we were part of a successful consortium led by a small UK development company called Factory 42. And we're working on this with them, with the Natural History Museum, the Almeida Theatre, Magic Leap, our technology partner, Exeter University, our research partner, and we have partners like Sky and Into the Shopping Centre working on the commercialisation of the project. And the project is really to bring together immersive theatre and mixed reality technology to build a new kind of experience, to test new kinds of audience experiences with visitors. And the idea is it has to innovate in terms of its audience model, its business model, and the technology involved in using this. So this will feel like a combination of immersive theatre, where you're going into physical spaces, there will be real actors, there's a whole lot of sensory technologies, there are smells, there are haptics, and that the whole time you're doing this, you'll be in Magic Leap headsets. So we're spending quite a lot of time at the moment playing with Magic Leap and working out what it's good at and what it's bad at. It is pretty amazing, maybe not quite as amazing as some of the videos that you might have seen a couple of years ago, but it shows lots of promise. We're in the creative stage of this project, so we're hunkering down on storylines. We need to have a complete narrative story arc completed in the next month, because we're starting to build the development teams to actually make this a reality. The project has to finish by December next year, by which time the consortium has to have over 100,000 people through the various experiences. So we're looking to launch this in the museums in probably late June, early July next year. And basically the full versions launch in the museum, so these are multi-room versions with actors and mixed reality. At the same time, we're launching smaller versions in shopping centres, which will just be, will have 1 or 2 rooms, and you'll be in mixed reality, but without the actors. And the idea is to test the scalability of the project. And then post-December next year, the idea is to commercialise both the projects that are made as part of this, so particularly the robots and dinosaurs detective games, but also the format, so the detective format and the IP invested in that. And as you can see, we're kind of in typical creative land, so we're spending lots of time with no technology, but lots of paper and post-it notes, and a bit of acting and playing to try and get a sense of how we're going to make that story work. And then I'll just leave you with just a few what's next for us. So before the Innovate UK bid came along, we'd done quite a bit of work looking at immersive spaces, and we have a detailed proposal that's in the next phase of our master plan to build an immersive digital studio in the museum. This will be a large space for between 40 and 50 people, a projected environment into which we commission various types of digital content, and we're looking at commissioning everything from completely on rails experiences, which would be passive experiences that people will watch together, through to highly interactive experiences where 50 people will interact in the space with their environment. We're also almost at the end of a piece of work looking back over the last 20 years of digital exhibits in the Science Museum, and looking back over the learning. So 3 of us have spent the last 6 months poring over about 300 evaluation reports that have been done over the last 20 years, trying to draw some conclusions about what's working really well, what's not, what's changed in the last 20 years. And this is really in a response. We did this piece of work in the late 1990s. We looked back at about 8 years of digital exhibits then, and we wanted to do this again to see what had changed, what we should be doing going forward, so that we could publish both for our own internal consumption, but also for the sector more widely, what we hope will be some really useful information on what makes good digital exhibits, and particularly how do visitors respond and use those exhibits. And I'll leave you with 2 things. So this is a quote that I'm constantly reminded of, and says a lot to me. So this is a quote from William Gibson that says, one of the things our grandchildren will find quaintest about us is that we distinguish the real from the digital and the virtual from the real. Our children don't do that. For our children, it's all the same thing. Magic Leap, it isn't a digital thing and a real world thing, it's all a real world thing. Those digital things appear to be in the real world, they're anchored in the real world. And I spend as much of my time pushing back and not doing digital things as I do doing digital things. And some of the things I've been most proud of to be involved in have not been digital things at all. And I just want to leave you with a lovely film. We commissioned a Danish art collective called Superflex to do some work with us around climate change and build an experience in the museum that went across our museum, because our museum is full of the things that are causing the current state of the world. They're full of big, power-hungry engines that are using natural resource. And we wanted people to have an experience across the museum that looked at that, not just in one gallery. And Superflex came to us with an idea of building a tour of cockroaches in the museum. So you imagine that you're a cockroach and you go on a tour of the museum, and you're a cockroach because they were here before humans were. And when we're all dead, when we've done nasty things to our planet, which we're increasingly looking likely to do, the cockroaches will still be here. So you went on a tour of the museum dressed as a cockroach, looking at the insanity of human beings. We loved the proposal. We weren't sure how our then director was going to respond to this, but fortunately he loved it too and allowed us to continue. And I'm just going to leave you with a short 40-second film clip of the cockroaches in action. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an impressive lineup of interesting projects, and the historical perspective is wonderful to see. We have time for questions. Does anybody have a question for Dave? In the back.
Hi, my name is Julia. I work for the Research Institutes of Sweden, and I'm also a master student at the Digital Humanities program here in Gothenburg. And I was wondering about the digitization of the collection, which was prompted by the move, or at least done in part with the move and the new facilities that you're building. Because I was listening to you and I was thinking that there is a parallel to the hackathons that you're doing, where you invite people to look at data collected and to do new things with the data. So I was wondering if you at the Science Museum have had some sort of similar situation where the digitization process that you're involved in with your collection has prompted you to ask new questions or see new possibilities or to develop new sort of exhibitions from the stuff that you already have?
Yes, but it's complicated. I mean, we most of our collection isn't digitized at all, and that which is digitized, a lot of the digitization is quite low quality. It's record photography. We are using the opportunity of the move to do much higher quality photography, but it will still primarily be record photography. We did the experiments around digitization to look at how we might do what we're terming enhanced digitization of some key objects within the museum and to get a sense of how long that would take. But one of the big challenges for the museum has been getting everybody to move beyond the fact digitization means taking a picture of the object. And actually that's a really tiny part of the process. A much bigger part is the proper cataloging and getting the metadata and the tags in place. Once that's done, then we can open that collection up, that digitized collection up to other people. One of the things that we've looked at for the digital studio is what would that be like if you could completely immerse yourself in the museum's collection, or if you could use that space for schools. Schools could do a piece of work where they might curate a digital exhibition in their school and then come to the digital studio and have that writ large in a room that's, you know, almost as big as this, that would be their personal unique exhibition for the time of their visit. And those things are possible once you get those good quality digitized assets in place, but we need to kind of make those building blocks before we can move on to that.
So we have another question there in the...
Dirk is my name. I work for a project, Cupido, about how to use culture and make jobs, create jobs in the culture sector. My question is related to this one. One of our partners in Wermland is the Rotnerus Park, which is a sculpture park. And those sculptures have the tendency of just standing there. So your collection probably has the same problem. They are just standing there and you're not allowed to touch them. So are you working with how to get into a sculpture, how to get into an old Volkswagen, I've seen it on the picture, and how to experience it, how to feel it maybe. Are you working with those kind of things?
I mean, certainly the audience of the future, the Robots and Dinosaurs projects, we're one of the partners in the consortium is a partner called the Feelies. And they are a group that specialise in sensory technologies. So they specialise in haptics and scent and other technologies which affect your senses. And we're really interested to explore as part of that how we might use those more broadly within the collections to bring those objects to life. But as you say, it's really difficult when you can't get in a car and drive a car. So how do we give you a sense of, you know, that's what it's like, and, you know, how did that react to you, and how is it different from a car that you drive today? So I think we're really interested to explore that, but again, it's kind of a really early stage, and we're using another much larger project to help us identify some of the technologies that might be worthy of future experimentation.
Okay, thank you so much. Time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant presentation. Thank you so much. Så, då är det dags för kaffe